Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Crystal Core Radio Podcast. Brian and Chris here sitting down today to talk with Smash JT. This year, 2024, has to be one of the most interesting and maybe even historic years because what we see going on right now is GamerGate 2.0, which is looking, with all the evidence that we keep seeing game release after game release, to be perhaps the first successful video game boycott that we have seen in recent history, maybe of all time. And so my first question to Smash, we're going to just jump right in, is that what are the goals of GamerGate 2.0 from your perspective?
That's actually really easy. To do the opposite of what games are doing right now, to stop uglifying women, to start making games that gamers actually want to play, to stop injecting modern themes into fantasy settings. I mean, just all the generic talking points that are just obvious to anyone that's a gamer, where it's like, I do not want to see games to continue to go down this road, nor do a lot of other people. And a lot of other people are making up their minds with their wallets right now. And hold on, my dog wants to come in.
All right, visitor from the dog. Let's see here. We have saw Robert saying that it's okay because you were late here as well.
There we go. Sorry.
All right, welcome back. No, you're good.
But no, so basically, I don't want to see the industry taken over by a bunch of tourists that aren't even in it for the money. Obviously, they're in it to push ideologies, and ideologies that I don't agree with, and that's probably the biggest of all of it. But yeah, that's basically my takeaway for why I fight the fight that I fight.
I was gonna see if Chris had a follow-up. No?
Okay.
All right. Well, that's a good answer. When this year alone, let's talk about just 2024, because it seems to have really picked up speed, obviously off the backs of Sweet Baby Inc. and the campaign that they issued against Cabrutus. And since then, the Streisand effect kicked in, I think, and really brought this to the forefront of the year. What is contributing to what I would call the success of this movement within gaming right now?
I think people are just really tired of the direction it's been going. Excuse me. The games themselves that are coming out, there are some that are very good, and it's an interesting direct correlation between the high quality game and the lack of injected social political ideologies being injected into them. So I think gamers just want to return to a time where that is something that isn't something to worry about. When we turn a game on, and I think you guys could agree with this, when you turn a game on, you don't want to be lectured. You don't want a company to be insidiously trying to manipulate how you think about things in order to think about it the way they do.
Right.
I'm all for a game opening up your mind to make you think a different way, maybe about stuff, depending on the type of game it is. But there's a time and a place for a certain game for that. If you start, like a game that keeps coming to mind right now is like Dragon Age Veilguard that's about to come out, and the whole, you have to pick a pronoun to play the game, and it's like, what? Why? Why? First off, why? That's not a thing in a fantasy world. Why are you forcing this on every single player when it's never been a thing? It's never been universally accepted. It's a clear indication that you are at least subtly, subconsciously trying to inject an ideology on people. And
I think that people see themselves in their RPG characters.
Huh?
Do you think people see themselves in their RPG characters?
That's a good question. Not necessarily, because you use it as escapism. I think my greater point for it is like, I don't want that to be a part of that fantasy world, though, is what I mean. It's not necessarily seeing yourself in a game. I know there's a lot of talk around representation these days, but any real gamers that I'm around don't give a shit about representation. They care about a game that is good for escapism. They don't have to see themselves in a game. They can be whatever they want to be. But it's when a developer starts to inject modern day ideologies to remove that setting, that feeling. It's not something that I want to see progress. I feel like it's a slippery slope that keeps getting worse and worse. And if you don't stand up to it, when does it stop?
I don't know that pronouns is the hill that I'm going to die on, because throughout, one of the things I found really jarring. I just went through the World of Warcraft main story for War Within, and one of the things they do is they can't pronounce your character name. They can't. There's no way to have an AI do a decent job of pronouncing. And so they do what games have always done. They insert other words. And this time what they do is they kind of use that as an extension of the person that's talking to you. So Gazlo says like, "Hey, buddy." And then you've got, these royal people like, "Oh, champion." But they're just inserting descriptors for you. And so when you're picking a character, especially as character models hopefully have more diversity and more ability to design something that looks the way you want to look. I have friends who like to design their characters to look like them, or I have friends who like to design characters to look like they wish they looked. And so they are trying to inject into that, as opposed to, I personally tend to identify with something that is as far from me as possible. So I'd like to be a cat person or a giant wolf, and so like, I don't have, so I play female characters in some games. I play male in other, because like I'm not viewing myself in the game. I'm playing a character. But like I'm aware that's very different than how some people play.
My wife likes to specifically play a big, tall black dude because it is the 100% exact opposite of her, short, pale. So it's like.
And so would she prefer, when they're speaking to her in the game, would she prefer to read the story as if they're talking to the big dude and they're going to use him, he, his, or would they prefer that they speak to her? Even though she's chosen an avatar that looks starkly different than her, maybe she'd prefer the story is told with a feminine note. That way, anytime it's in that phrase, it can swap all those for her. Especially as we ask for better storytelling, better voice acting. We have actual writers in games now. We didn't have that 20 years ago. It was just, hey, who here passed their English class? Like we didn't have that level of writing. So like, I think the pronoun thing, like if it's just a single selection in character, then that is no different than people who say like, why do they offer so many hairstyles? Why do they let me choose my eye color? I don't care. I just want to kill things. Like, there should just be hit randomize. I pick the male body, it defaults to the male pronoun and move on. Like that just feels like a weird hill to make, like the depth of.
Why is it a weird hill if it's something that's never existed in gaming and now it's becoming something that's becoming a standard that a lot of people do not like? Why is it a weird hill to die on?
Well, lots of things have never existed in gaming.
But typically things come in that people enjoy, like to make the games better by forcing a thing like this. And I agree with you. It's not maybe the biggest deal in the world. It's not a completely awful world-breaking thing, but it is something that I don't want to perpetuate.
But I do use pronouns. Like my pronouns.
I can tell. You don't need to tell me. I can tell the way you're arguing me. I don't need you to tell me that.
So like, no,
I'm just saying, so just like, because you use them, why does that?
They're not in my bio. They're not in my LinkedIn. They're not in any of those things. But I'm saying I've used them my whole life. I used them in the 1980s.
Right, but why?
I was my parents' boy. I've been a boy my whole life, and it happens to be that I align with the stereotype. You see me with a beard, you assume I'm a male. I am a male. It's not been a shocking point, but like when I booted up Call of Duty today, it had me skim past some seizure warnings. It had me adjust for, do I want any accessibility options enabled?
Mm-hmm.
That I've never needed accessibility options. I've never had seizures. I all of my digits work. I have perfect hand-eye coordination. So like I don't.
Yeah, I think the seizure warning
is that's
another hill I could die on if you want to go there. I think the seizure warning thing is very annoying. That's something
so
I don't
get seizures.
Like. What's that?
Unless you get seizures.
Well, they should be on the packaging. You're playing a video game. You should definitely have these concerns and research these on your own. It's a seizure warning is pretty obvious with every video game, and it's something, if you really do get them, I would personally, if I was prone to seizures from playing games or movies or anything flashing, I would do heavy research on anything that I played before I started playing. I wouldn't rely on a generic default startup screen that forces everyone to see that screen just because of that. Because there's
Is it just a one-time thing though?
It was just a one-time thing. It was just a checkbox. I can just disable some of the screen shakes and stuff that they have. Just like disabling gore, or the fact that my character in the game, when I shot a guy, goes, "Die, fucker." Like, I think you can turn that off.
Yeah. Call
of Duty has profanity in it. It does. And I know that because I just played it. But like, I can turn that off. You know, maybe I have kids in the house or something. I don't know. It just seems like if there's a checkbox there that lets more people enjoy games, then
I don't understand how a warning about flashing on a screen helps more people enjoy a game.
This had a box to turn it off.
Okay.
So if those things cause seizures,
okay, we're
just disable the feature. And I did not check the box because I like the flashing. I think it adds to the realism, and it's not going to cause me any harm.
We're discussing two different things then. I was talking about games that have a seizure warning every time you load it up, and it's there every time. It's very frustrating.
Okay. But like, the pronoun thing is closer to that. It's more akin to that. They're not asking you to choose your pronoun every time you log in.
But they're forcing you to choose a pronoun though.
The same way you choose a male or female.
No. I mean, that's like a what if someone, like you're saying, I have pronouns.
They don't refer to you like when you're invited to lunch and they don't use your name.
Like every time I start talking, you talk over me. Do you mind if I just speak? I feel like with a game like with pronouns, it's forcing you to select something. You're saying you've had pronouns your whole life. What if you're someone that has the complete opposite perspective of the world? How about be respectful to them and say, oh, this person chooses not to identify with pronouns, but we don't give them that option. How is that fair to them if you want accessibility for all?
I think you're mistaking what I say by I identify with pronouns. I didn't ever pick my pronouns. I didn't have a...
You told me earlier I have pronouns. You said I have pronouns.
Right. Well, everybody does.
So does my dog. It's a boy, and I call him...
That's just language.
I'm saying English.
This is getting into semantics, though. I'm saying you're forcing it on someone to choose it. That's obviously, you have a pronoun you need to speak to someone with, but that's kind of like an understood thing. Like, you're a male, you're a he. Like, you're a girl, you're a she. When you start introducing these they, them, z, zer stuff, it starts getting into a very strange world. You know what I mean?
I just think in an RPG where it's a role-playing game, if it's going to use language when referring to my character, I would like if they let me not use the word champion in Azeroth, because I think that it takes something out, that everything's reliant on me. And so I would like if they let me pick different adjectives if they're not going to be able to pronounce my character name. And so if they would let me refer to it as hero or something less than like champion of Azeroth, like I would personally like that. So if they gave me some preference, if I'm going to put an input into the game that you can't pronounce, anytime you type a character name, it's going to now inject that into the narrative. So any narrative-based game, it's going to have to put something in it. It's going to have to refer to you by the gender of the character model you picked, or it's going to have to just put a random adjective in.
So we're getting away from the male-female selection. I think that's why this is you're like, oh, I don't think it's a hill to die on. This is why it's a hill to die on, because it goes into a lot more than just a pronoun or a preferred pronoun, like YM Rand said. So selecting a male, are you against a game that has a startup screen where it's just male, female, and you select? Is that something that you would have an issue with?
The character creation screen has never been a reason for me to play or not play a game. Some games offer more options than I use, and some games offer less options than I would like.
Okay.
But that is a portion of the developers' resources and their vision of the game, and I'm happy to play it the way that they play it. The character creation has just never been an area that I think is the reason to, like, I'm not ever going to buy or not buy a game because of the character creation.
That's fair, and you're right. I feel like that's every consumer's right to make that choice. What I'm saying is, in the grander scheme of what's going on right now, you are in the minority from what I've been discussing with a lot of people. There's a lot of people out there that are dying on this hill because they don't like the direction it's going, because it is a big deal to them, even though in the grand scheme of a video game, the character selection is such a minor detail. But what it speaks to, what it is trying to do within that is a much larger conversation, and that's a conversation we're having right now. It's not just a pronoun thing; it's a much deeper conversation.
Yeah, there's what I always kind of relate it to is almost I have to use religious words because there is a sense of kind of this religious argument being made. And to the point where you were making earlier, Smash, is that I would have as equal an objection if all of a sudden I was playing Mario and he decided to stop and talk about his Catholic faith as an Italian. It doesn't fit the world and the universe, and it takes me completely out of it. And it really is like, wait, why do we have that? It's
Right.
not that a Christian game couldn't exist. In fact, people have tried and made them, and they do exist, and they just don't sell. And what I think is essentially what we're seeing is the market is saying, like, this isn't what we want to buy, and so we're just not going to buy it. And this is the first time I think in history that's actually happening, because generally speaking, we could talk about video game addiction in a way of this is that it's been very consumer, like keep buying the product, consumer. We're going to shove my, and it's not just like, we were talking about pronouns earlier, but it can extrapolate to microtransactions. It can extrapolate to poor quality games that are coming out in these pay it early, get it, pay it, play it 5 days early, and it's going to end up being a buggy mess, and you're going to pay a premium for that, and then we're going to just patch it later. So we've seen some bad habits that aren't just pronoun driven that I feel like is all coming to, ahead. So we have, I would say, from your perspective, Smash, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have a couple of key items of things that you were saying, I'm not going to play games with these things. But also behind the scenes, when we start looking at gamers as well, is like, I think you have a lot of gamers that are overworked, underpaid. The economy that is going on right now has got them scared. And so they're also sitting on their wallets. And so I do wonder if that, like, if we were trying to segment the different kind of movements, it's that it's GamerGate 2.0 isn't just, people who are frustrated about ideologies being inserted into the games, but it's people and gamers who are just been frustrated due to any other factor. And it's just easy for people to say, you know what, I don't need to spend money. I have a backlog of incredible games that I haven't played.
I think that's a really good take, actually, because it's not limited to just what me and Gaming Kinda are chatting about. It's a much bigger situation, and it's a very convenient thing to blame it on, for sure. It's a lot easier to point the conversation at that, but the macro is a much larger picture where it's not just the economy. It's games take longer to finish now.
Mhm.
People are worked harder, working longer hours now to make ends meet, and they have less free time to spend gaming. And with that time that they have to spend the gaming, they have to make a choice on how they're going to be spending it and what games to play it with. And we have these games that are coming out annually that are AAA 10 out of 10 games, probably once every 6 months. And then you get a AAA 9 out of 10 game once every 3 months. Like there's so many, and they all take 200 hours to complete. Every single one of these games, 150 hours if you really want to get into them. And you're telling me these people that not everyone's a hardcore gamer like us. Like, I'm talking about the general casual people that just want to play games when they're free time. They have maybe an hour a day, couple hours a day to play a game, if that. And they're going to get enthralled and lost in a world like, we'll say, Final Fantasy Rebirth. That could legitimately take someone 5 months.
A whole year.
Finish 6 months.
I'm still working through Remake in terms of that. Like, I'm making good progress. I haven't beaten Remake, and I'm like, somebody was saying Rebirth is a 70, 80 hour game.
Yep.
And that's also something that's interesting that, just as a side note or a little side tangent, is that as a kid, 60 hours for a video game was like, sign me up. But as an adult, I'm like, how the hell am I going to find 60 hours? Like, where, like, that is my year.
It's the constant struggle that we all have getting older. I used to, the same as you, when I was younger, I used to look forward to getting older so I could have the money to buy the games. And now we have the constant paradox of having the money and not the time.
I literally was like, I wonder, I was like, I'm going to feel like a success the day that I can buy 2 new games at the same time and have to debate which one I'm going to play. And now I'm like, oh God, can you move your release by 1 week? Please.
And and we get into the situation where it's, for example, getting back to what me and Gaming Kinda were talking about with Dragon Age the Veilguard. And it's like, why should I go out of my way and open my wallet and purchase this game in particular when, like Ginger Prime was saying, You have a backlog of 12 games that are awesome games that you want to get to. Why should you, and if you're someone that doesn't believe in some of the stuff that Dragon Age is doing, which again, to each their own, Gaming Kinder, you're welcome. If you like it, go buy it, have at it. I'm not saying people shouldn't buy a game.
I said it's not a reason to buy or not buy a game. Like, I just don't think it's the most important quality.
Right, and that's fine, that's fair, and that's what I'm saying is like
on any side of it.
No, that's fair. I think, but what Ginger Prime is getting at is the bigger cause of why the games aren't being purchased, because there's a lot of people in my camp that don't like the direction that a lot of these games are taking, the forced ideologies, things like that, as minor as they may be. And it's just another hurdle to jump over when you don't even have the time to get to them in the first place. So why should a gamer go out of their way, purchase this brand new game, especially on day one at full price or whatever, and start playing it, push their backlog over when these backlog of games were already proven great 10 out of 10, have to get to experiences that don't do that ideology pushing? I
don't think pronouns is determining the market. I don't think it's helping games sell more games. I don't think it's hurting games selling more games.
I think it is.
Baldur's Gate 3 did just fine and allowed an incredible level of inclusivity and inclusion, but it was done genuinely. As opposed to games like Mario talking about his Catholicism doesn't feel genuine. That is not a pronoun issue. That is not a character creation issue. That is something that is core through the whole game. And so when you see somebody that is like done with a tokenism, where an attribute is assigned to them for the sole purpose of diversity, and it has nothing to do with anything else in the game, it is used almost stereotypically, almost insultingly. That is when you're seeing people rally against a game.
I would not say even done insultingly. I know there's a lot of people that rallied against the top surgery scars, and I would say that wasn't done insultingly. People just don't want that kind of stuff in a fantasy setting.
In a world of magic too. Like that's where it's like we've also seen the wheelchair fantasy, character, and it's like, all right, you're in a world in which you have magic and shape shifting and healing, and yet you're choosing to be in this, and it's like there's a cognitive dissonance. There's a disconnect that I have there. To kind of bring this up to where the hardest thing about it this year is the Dragon Quest III remake, because that isn't in a game that I would say is that the creators are actually wishing that they could do this. In fact, they've been on record saying, why do we have to do this? This is ridiculous. It's like this unrelenting God that, we can't go up against. And so they had, instead of picking pronouns, they just straight up removed gender. And I guess that was probably what they believed to be their happy path to
middle ground,
being middle ground in this regards. But yet
that right there, what you just got at is the slippery slope. We're gaming kind of saying it's not a big deal. Everyone's got pronouns. Just pick them. What if you want to make a game that's a fantasy setting? You just want to make male and female avatar. And then you got this ratings board called the ESRB saying, no, you can't do that anymore. You need to either do the A, B, or do the pronoun thing. How is that fair to a developer, impacting how they can make a decision on creating their game when an outside entity is impacting them?
Does the ESRB have that power?
According to the Japanese Square Enix developers.
I don't know if it's related to the ESRB, but it was related essentially to like marketing and the West. They really pointed out that it's coming from the West. I don't recall it being ESRB.
Coming from the West, most likely the ESRB.
Oh, you got muted for some reason.
Sorry, my wife came in. But yeah, the ESRB, I believe, again, it's like the man behind the curtain. They didn't let us know who's a puppet master making these decisions. We can all just infer it's the ESRB. But if you, gaming kind of, you're saying, I don't know if that's the ESRB. Okay, fine. Whoever it is that's making developers do this, it is not a natural choice for the developers. And that therein lies my frustration with it. That's what I'm getting at.
Just a character creator feels like something, the more options they can put in there, the better. Okay, and I will probably not use the vast majority of them.
If it's the more options, the better, then why not give people the option of not using preferred pronouns? That's more options.
I assume you just pick it just like you pick body type A or B. Like I assume it just defaults. I don't know. It would depend on the game. You would have to go by game. You would have to go game by game and character creator by character creator to kind of.
We'll do Veilguard. Why not?
Veilguard. That's what's next.
The additional option of you don't need that.
Okay.
Why not?
then,
Why
then
not
ask
give
for that. Then ask for a checkbox where we can turn it off, and then they can just not
right? That's
use
what I'm
he
saying. I
or
feel like
she
that would
anywhere in any of the text at any time. Because like I said, the English language uses pronouns. I understand that there is a trans movement that is using it differently, and that's why it's of note, because they are using it in an atypical fashion. But we are talking about a very small percentage of the population that needs that accommodation. So it's a very small group.
I guess
The
the
vast majority of us are identifying as the gender that we were born as.
Well, real quick, Ginger, let me jump over you real quick. The head developer of Dragon Age: The Veilguard is trans.
Okay.
But
so they probably feel like there's a lot of trans people.
It's a
so it
very
felt like an important
movement.
priority to them.
Right. But you say it's a small movement, it's a minority of people. But what if that small movement minority of people is in control of the narrative? Then it changes things, don't you think?
Well, they are.
Yeah, I mean, well, they can be in charge
of
of their percentage of games, just like any other group of people. But as you noted, there are a lot more games to consume now than ever before. And so it is very easy. If a director leaves a studio, leaves a publisher, you could follow them. You could buy whatever games they come out wherever they go, or you could avoid them. If you don't like Todd Howard and Todd Howard leaves Bethesda, you could say, I don't care where he goes, I'm not buying that either. And you could just not buy anything that comes out under Todd Howard's, just like my wife avoids various actors. She avoids actors that there are certain movies she will not watch if an actor takes part in that production, because she disagrees with their actions off of the screen, as opposed to I'm more what's on the screen is on the screen. I will go see something even if the actor is accused of something. Like, it doesn't change the films I buy. That's just not the line that I choose to determine that on.
That's fair. I guess what I'd interject is I'd say you're actually kind of sounds like you're making my point now, where you're saying you're giving the customer the right to make the choice, and the customers are all making the choice that they're rejecting this overwhelmingly.
I don't think that that's the driving force of whether or not a game is selling, was my point.
So what do you think is causing all of these games to fail? Is it YouTubers talking trash about them? Or is it the reality of the game developers themselves and the injected ideologies that are being shoved in?
The economics has a lot to do with it. When you spend $500 million on a game, it requires a pretty astronomical level of success to be considered financially successful. Some games that are being considered failed are still profitable. They're just not hitting projections because of the level of investment in gaming now. So companies like Square Enix have said games let them down, but that doesn't mean that the game was not profitable. It just means it was not as profitable as they had maybe hoped. But then you go back and look at these projections, and like literally everybody needs to go back inside for 2 more years and consume games, or none of these games are going to make it. So some of these games have just spent too much. And then they're just failing to deliver on basic needs. Halo Infinite didn't fail because it didn't include or did include anything with character creator. It failed because it didn't offer core game modes it didn't offer core playability on day one. And they spent a crazy amount of money on it.
With the Halo Infinite, I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people like to trash it, but it's because it wasn't ready on day one. The game itself was fantastic. I had a great time playing the single player experience. I didn't really get into the multiplayer. I heard people say the multiplayer is fantastic as well, but it just took way too long after it released for it to even come together, and they lost everyone because of that.
Yep.
And it always makes me kind of wonder the rush to get these games out to appease investors and the higher ups and the CEOs of these companies to make sure they get them out. And we can just patch them. But that was a Cyberpunk thing. Like, they lost me, even though Cyberpunk came around, ended up being what people seem to unanimously say it's
No Man's Sky.
I bought it on day one, and I was very disappointed by the overall clunky experience I had with it. So because of that, they lost me. So I feel like the game, to your point, there's a very interesting dynamic of how much money is being spent to create these games behind the scenes before they come out, and then just expecting customers to just buy them and they'll be fixed. Star Wars Outlaws is another one where Ubisoft's on record saying, "Oh, we're gonna fix it and patch it and make it better." It's like, in 45 days, this game was in development for what, 6-7 years? Why couldn't you use an extra 45 days and patch it? What the hell is going on here? It's just very strange how this always seems to be the case with these games. And you combine that with a lot of the other stuff. Again, it's a multifaceted, multi-headed beast that we're battling right now. It's not just the pronouns. I would say that is along the lines of other things that are being injected with ideologies in games. That's just one head on this multi-headed beast. There's a lot of different things that people are fighting off: money, finance, time, like so many issues going on with it. So it comes down to a game that comes out needs to completely blow away anything in your backlog. The only example I can come up with right now would be like a new Zelda game, a new Mario game, Grand Theft Auto 6, like these kind of games that are universal backlog killers. They will just be like, whatever you have in your backlog, you'll push it aside for these games that come out. But those are becoming the exception, not the rule. Where I feel like a few years ago it was reversed, where new games are coming out and every game was pushing your backlog back, and now it's not so much doing that anymore. Would you agree with that?
I agree with most of this. I think this is actually hitting on my core point of where I think gaming is. I don't think DEI is the best predictor. I think that people pointing at games and saying this one had DEI and it did well or it failed based on the agenda that I would prefer to the outcome, I don't think that's actually corollary. I don't think that the vast majority, I don't think it's a good predictor. I think people said Concord failed because it was over pushing inclusivity, but I think it failed because it tried to enter a free-to-play space with a paycheck and didn't have any unique identity as a gameplay, because there are games that include more DEI in that space that are doing fine. So it's clear that it's not like, well, then the shooting-based like style of combat like that style of gameplay doesn't allow for DEI in that game, or that's not the case.
I want to jump in real quick, Smash, because I was going to say, like, when it comes to DEI, I think it's more of a red herring, because what I feel it's the virtue signaling DEI. It's the, if all of a sudden the company is really going out of their way to be like, look at us do this thing over here. That's usually where, when we talk about pattern recognition within gaming and within gamers, that's where I think people are coming in on DEI, because it's that's where the conversation, just like with the work woke, like, what are we talking about here? What's the actual definition? And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Smash, but I would argue it's that we're actually not for diversity. We're the side that's wanting diversity. We're the side that says, let's just give like, why are we being excluded? Why are we cutting this out? And then why are we being preached to every time we just want to go play a video game? Why do I have to sit here and read about, and we saw this happen with Final Fantasy 16, where the media was targeting Yoshi P because he didn't include black characters in his story. It's like, let them make their art, let them make the game that they want to make, and then let the market decide. But why we also have this avenue in which that's pushing, and I think that's also causing a lot of fatigue. People don't know what to believe and where to trust. Go ahead.
I just jump in and boil it down to, I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're saying gamers aren't against DEI as long as it's natural. But the problem is the DEI that's appearing these days is a lot of virtue signaling and injecting and putting people into the games, race swapping, and doing all these other things that are not normal and natural, and people are noticing it and they're saying this does not fit my idea for a game. Now, if to back to what me and Kind of Gaming was saying, if there was no backlog, no games, and this was the first generation of gaming just ended up being a thing right now. There's never an NES, there was never an Atari. It's just like, oh, technology brought us to this point, and boom, these amazing games are here. I do think it would be a little bit different because people wouldn't have an option to choose other games. I feel like what this is showing is people have an option, and they're saying, well, I don't have to be forced into playing these games. I can play what I want now. And I feel like that's a very scary proposition to a new developer spending hundreds of millions of dollars on a game. Now they have to tend to fight with that thing that never existed before. They never had to worry about that back in the old days because there was no competition. There was no backlog. It was just, these are games. You want to play the newest game because it's really all there is.
I think there is plenty of DEI going on games that's not getting that level of call out. I think the ones that you're talking about are the ones that we're vocal about being frustrated with are the ones that are doing it poorly. But I just finished the War Within based storyline, and it had a ton of representation of viewpoints other than a cis white male. It just had a lot. There were a lot of different characters, but they were going through it from a real standpoint. That character was fully fleshed out. Those were not assigned as attributes. They basically spun up this character, and in this situation allowed them to react and live through these moments in a way that didn't feel forced or or fake, to me, it felt like, and I connected with them in the same ways that I would have connected with people that were of those groups that are in my personal life, the same way I would have connected with the women in my life, or, anybody of a different age or different racial group or different sexuality. The only times it was brought up is when it mattered. I didn't feel that anything in the War Within was the DEI was the focus. It was just a natural, hey, there probably was DEI in the room. There probably were employees in there to say, hey, let's make sure we do this well, right? We have a cis white male trying to write a part that's affecting a woman. Should we have a woman look this over? Because odds are I'm not the best writer to represent an emotional moment for a character that's so different than myself. So like DEI, I think, was present in the room, but it didn't feel like something that needed to be called out in the way that like Concord did, where it felt slapped on, it felt stapled to, it felt like you should buy this game because if you don't support our DEI, and that's very different.
I'd agree with that. I think with the War Within, that's World of Warcraft, right?
Yeah.
I think that's it's a great example from your perspective, but I would counter that with, I think World of Warcraft is kind of its own genre. Like, it's like if you play World of Warcraft, you're most likely going to continue playing World of Warcraft, whereas someone like me, I don't play World of Warcraft. So the idea of an expansion that has potential DEI in it, why would I ever pick up the controller keyboard for it? You know what I mean? Like, why would I even start when there's other options out there for becoming a new customer for them? Because I'm looking at it from the perspective of just a gamer. If they want more people playing these games, how is this going to sell someone like me to go, oh, I want to go play that, even though it got great reviews? Like, I'm looking at it right now, IGN 9 out of 10, PC Gamer 80, PC Games 8 out of 10, like lots of good reviews for it, but it's World of Warcraft. And when you said what you said about how you're sure it has DEI in it and all this, but you didn't notice it, I'm like, okay, why should I go play it? Like, when there are other games out there in my backlog that I'd rather play. I think that's what the developers are battling. That's what I'm saying, where it's like, you need to give a buying proposition to a customer to make them drop what they have in their backlog and say, I'm going to play the latest Mario, the latest Zelda, the latest Metroid, the latest Grand Theft Auto. Like,
I think if you think that DEI is an important part of the whole game experience, that's great, but I don't think it's risen to the point that it's on the box art. I think if you're only listing 3 or 4 features, there's not a single game out there that is commercially successful where DEI is the first and foremost goal.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah. And so to then say, I'm not going to play this game because it has DEI, we're all playing the game for the box art. We're all playing the game for the top 3 or 4 features, the vast majority of us. It can make somebody's experience a little bit sweeter when we add something that helps them better identify with a character, or we add an accessibility option that allows a different group to engage. And that's great if they can include those people or not. Like, that's a dev's choice, but like the majority of gamers are playing for the top of line items. That's why Hogwarts was successful independent of the social pushback.
But you keep saying if the developer can include something to make the player connect with them better. And I guess I'm arguing counterpoint. What if what the developer is including actually by inclusion is excluding a pocket of gamers that are like, no, I don't want that option. I want it to be the way these games typically play. Don't they need to take that into consideration?
I mean, they're absolutely, they're trying to design for ideally tens of thousands of concurrent players. So it is a constant arithmetic problem of how do I allow more people to have fun without getting to the point that I'm pushing people off of the other side of the boat. So is there something I can add where these people are like, it's not really my thing, but it lets more people on the boat without getting to the point that, like, by letting 5 people on, do I have to push 10 people off?
Well, I guess that's a good simile. I guess what I'm getting at is the idea of inclusion in gaming to sell more copies of games is a dangerous road to go down, because the whole idea of making a great product is not how many people does this game appeal to, it's how great can I make this game. And then if you build it, they will come to it, not the other way around. Not I need to build this game for them. Like, what was it?
Right.
Was it Miyamoto that said, like, a game built for everyone is a game made for no one? Like, it's kind of like that. You can't try to make something for everyone, because it's going to start turning people off. There's a special middle ground that you have to hit, a dynamic that obviously you need an audience. You can't make a game for nobody, but you need to make a game for the game's sake, making the game because it's a fantastic idea. There's an original hook. There's something new to it that everyone wants to be a part of. That's what sells a game, not inclusion. Inclusion is the anti that, in my opinion.
My dad would always describe it as that you want to make a product for a market. You don't want to make a product and then try to find a market. And that is something that I feel is very apt to kind of the current scenario, because the market's saying, hey, we want this. And it's rewarding those who are actually making that product. And that's why this year, I think, like with Black Myth Wukong, No Rest for the Wicked, there's a handful of like games that I'm just like, these are great. These are great examples.
That's dangerous though, because I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, please. I'm Italian. You cut me off. Like, I gotta
me too.
Just jump in.
Talk with my hands here.
Exactly. It's like I'll sit up my hands for a minute.
No, but my greater point is you got to be careful with that, because what did you say? Build a game for a market.
You make a product for a market that exists. You're like, hey, here's a market. All right, here's the need that market has. I'm going to fill that need, as opposed to saying, hey, I have an idea for a thing, and then you make it, and then you're like, all right, who do I sell it to now? I need to figure out where I'm going.
But again, there's a middle ground with that, because that's very dangerous, starting to make a game for a market, because then you get a boardroom of people saying, hey, everyone, what's the latest hit there? Fortnite?
No.
All right, let's make a Fortnite game. Or
that's what they do. That's
literally what happens. By venture capital.
Concord.
So you are going to have to convince. Well, yes, we hope that the person in the room actually working on the game is there to make a good game and is passionate about it. Somebody, either that person or some advocate on their behalf, is going to have to go beyond that little sphere of influence, and they're going to have to talk to a board of directors about finances who likely don't care about games, and they're going to want to know, okay, how broad of a market are you appealing to? What percentage of that market do you believe will engage? How long will they engage for? Are there additional revenue sources beyond the initial purchase? And those things are going to have to be talked about. Games that do not back themselves with good finances don't make it. Games that only back themselves with good finances don't make it. You have to have both.
And that's the problem. And that speaks to what Ginger Prime was saying earlier. One of the pillars of problems that the gaming industry has right now, gaming, creating especially a AAA game, but even AA, is millions upon millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. You can't take a risk anymore, because you can't. You need something to sell to the investors. You need something to sell to the boardroom, saying, we can guarantee this will sell, this IP will sell based off of the exact same fucking game that exists over here. So we're going to copy and replicate it 100% and just make the characters different, like Concord. And it's like, no, the game already exists, and you can't charge money on it when you're competing with free-to-play games. Like, none of this makes any sense. These people clearly don't play games. They're out of touch with the market. They don't know what's going on. And because the games cost so much, they have to get approval from people that don't play the games, and it's a catch-22.
I don't see where excluding DEI or including DEI is the single best metric for how successful a game is.
I would not argue it's the single best metric, but I would say it is a substantial.
And so with the number of games out there, I don't have time to play games that are probably great games that I would enjoy and probably have the exact amount of representation that I would want and the exact amount of gameplay I would want and would run the exact length and are offered at a fair price and have fair monetization practices. There are probably games out there that I would truly enjoy that I just don't have time for. Mm-hmm. And so to try to sit and say like, well, I'm going to start, I wanted to play this game, but I'm not going to play this game because in the character select screen, it's going to make me choose a pronoun. I can't imagine that being the real reason. Well, I can't imagine getting to that point that right. I watched a Let's Play and then I made it to the character select and then I noticed the pronoun and then that caused me to take it out of my shopping cart.
Yeah, there's what I see kind of as this extrapolates is that there isn't a single issue. Everybody's going to have their things that they're looking at, right? Like I brought up Dragon Quest III. Like for me, that's frustrating because the developers don't themselves want to do that and they're feeling forced. And I feel like the only way that we can then communicate back to them is to unfortunately not buy the game, which is going to probably have some knock-on effects later down the road because there's a chance they're going to get the wrong message. I've seen executives all the time look at data and then like it turns out they were reading the chart upside down. And it's like, come on, guys, what are you doing? You've got so much data and yet you're still making these mistakes. So I don't think it's a single issue. Just like we talked about the economics of it, we talked about all these different things. Everybody's just going to have these things, and it's this massive coalition of all of these things that is actually causing GamerGate to be what I would say the first successful video game boycott.
Something we didn't even touch on, part of GamerGate, another head of the dragon, is I personally feel, based off of what I've been covering, that there is inherent bias from professional games journalism that is has a destination in mind that they're pushing with certain games. That they don't necessarily care about the quality of the game. They have the ideologies that they want to push with the game. So they have backroom connections or friendships with the devs where like, oh, this game, that game. That's a whole nother thing. It's trying to manipulate not that people pay attention to the professional journalists anymore, but it's trying to manipulate the public perception of the games.
It also does impact content creators though, too, because it's that, we know hands down that access media can also color that relationship in poor light. And we've seen some laws come down. They were already in the place, but they had to kind of set it up with YouTube, especially when it comes to COPPA, where it's like, okay, now these are clearly advertisements. That's what actually killed Saturday morning cartoons was the COPPA law, by the way, because they were like, this is just a giant ad for these toys. We can't do that for the kids. And then it all spilled out over on YouTube for a good long while. But yeah, that's just
I
one
think
thing.
The journalism thing is shifted the other way. I don't have any data to back this particular statement, but I think that you are watching more devs cut out journalists who speak against their game or get in their way and saying, then you don't get review copies from me, than the other way around. That the journalists are saying, if you don't add my message, I'm going to be able to send out my incredibly loud review saying how angry I am with you, and it's going to hurt your game sales. Like, I think it is more likely devs hold the journalists hostage in that relationship.
I see it going both ways, but yeah, that's fair.
Just because they're fighting a dying medium.
Yeah.
They're fighting. They're having to struggle for access. And so that puts the devs in the more powerful position.
Good. Sorry.
I was going to say, for example, we got it feels like, just based off initial research, that there's a healthy amount of journalists in access media that have been, for some weird reason, defending Sweet Baby Inc. Without giving the full story, without presenting not just Kotaku. I've seen it with what's the other one? There's been a few of them. I can't think of the top of my head.
Lies of omission is how I phrased it.
Yeah,
exactly. That's the exact point that I was going to bring up. It's like if they just told the full story, I don't think I'd be interested 100%. In this year. It's just tell the full story, educate people, let people make up their decision. But the
reason why I bring it up is The Verge was another one. Ash Parrish was doing the same. And then there was another one too. They all work together, and they all push the same story. And it's just curious because it's like, well, why would you not give the full story to the reader? Why would you not? What is your angle here? And then they get so angry at YouTubers that are just covering the Sweet Baby Inc. games that they were trying to run defense for. And you got to wonder what's going on behind the scenes. Why is this? And I feel like that's just another layer. It's not just the DEI. There's a strong conflict of interest going on behind the scenes that's been uncovered here. And I think gamers are rejecting that wholeheartedly. Now, if the games are fantastic and incredible experiences, I don't think people give a shit, honestly. The game could like I've said before, could come out of a comet and land in my backyard, and I'd pop it into my Super Nintendo. I don't care who makes it. Like, if it's a great game, it's a great game. I think it's just, now that people have more information, they see the people making the games, they see the decisions that are being made, and there's a pattern, and people are recognizing the patterns, and people are being turned off by those said patterns.
I guess the question then would be, because when you brought that up, I've seen people try to label the metaphor game as woke, and I pushed back on that. It seemed like it seems like you're trying to get a point on the board when I don't think that they've gotten any points on the board this year, if we're thinking about it in terms of Team A and Team B. Mm-hmm. But what I would say in that is that, because they're trying to say that the themes of the game are woke, right? And that's where it's like, that word, what does it mean? Like, depending on who's saying it, can give you different interpretations. And so it's that to your point, like just make a really good game. It's like, I don't remember Atlas like virtue signaling online. I don't remember Atlas like attacking its core base of saying it's not for you, and if you don't like it, you don't buy it. It's like
Passion was in making the game.
we're making the game, and we want to tell the story. And that's the thing about especially fantasy, is it gives us as human beings to separate ourselves from our real history and our real problems and our real failures, and actually tell good stories about that. I always think of Star Trek, because it's like, that's it. Like they push boundaries. They really move the needle forward, especially within various different TVs, like in the TV space. But it was in this fantasy world. Like, and so you could have these difficult conversations about race and all these things in that context, because it actually allows you to separate it from, like your personal history. And so that's where it's like, yeah, those aren't, that's what I wouldn't define as this. I would define more like what you've kind of alluded to, Smash, with it's this, ideal, isms that are just being pushed into the games. And we're just like, all right, well, let me know when you're done, and then I'll come back and I'll check out this other game,
Yep. Well, I think part of the problem is making the games and taking into account the audience that you're making them for, but also making a good game. And the problem it's turned into is, how do we put a certain angle into this game? And I feel like when you start going down that road, that's when gamers start to raise eyebrows, being like, why are you doing this? The pattern is also injecting nonsense in allegory or a game as strong lore and change it up to cater to the modern audience. Yeah.
I agree with that.
You are trying to cater to the audience that's going to buy your product always. In everything you do, you're always trying to adjust. And so that is a constant dialogue between the makers and the consumers in any industry. Same in a restaurant. If you have a dish that's not selling and you try another dish for a special and it is selling, you might consider swapping it out on the menu.
So with that,
not because it's what you like cooking or what you like cooking in your own home, but because you are trying to run a business here. And that's not saying, well, my Mexican food restaurant needs to start serving hamburgers because the hamburger place across the street is selling a lot of hamburgers. But it is like, hey, within the realm of things that I'm comfortable cooking, this seems to be what people enjoy.
So with that perspective, then, do you feel like, again, and go back to Dragon Age's Veilguard, because it's the latest soup of the day.
Honestly, it's going to be just to jump in, it's like, that's the one game that I'm like, I'm curious to see how it sells. I think it's going to sell decent based off of the brand, but will it be one of those where it underperforms because of the cost of development and, and people sitting on their hands?
It will underperform. I mean, the game, it will sell, but it will underperform. It's been 8+ years in development, 9+ years in development. It's gone through how many redevelopment cycles? It's going to underperform, but they need to get it out and make some money back on it at this point. But my question to Gaming Kinda was, to his point, like, you need to make a game for an audience. And I would argue, okay, so I'm telling you, based off of just my interactions on my YouTube channel, there is a large portion of the gaming audience that love Dragon Age, the series, and are all saying, like, for the most part, I can't say all, but the vast majority of people are rejecting it, saying, I don't want anything to do with the pronoun stuff. They are telling me this, by the way. I'm not making this up. I don't have any like stats to show you. I'm just saying, I'm seeing the comments. They're making this game for the audience that does want that. And I guess I'm asking you, do you feel like there's a bigger audience there because that's the direction they're going with it? Or why would they do that?
I don't know where Dragon Age gets their data. I do know that pulling comments from your own YouTube section is going to tend to agree with you more in most cases. Most YouTubers are going to build an audience of people that like, or at least respect their views. So like, I think that hopefully their data set is broader than any one YouTuber is able to get access to. It's more about like, what do we gain and what do we lose? Every choice within a business is what do we gain and what do we lose? And so if there are people out there that like it and the people that say they don't like it still buy it, that's probably a feature you should consider adding to a game, regardless of the feature, pronoun or not. If you are going to gain people that will have a better experience or will purchase your game, and the people who don't like it are still going to buy your game, from a business standpoint, especially with more than 5 years of development, which the vast majority of games now have more than 5 years of development, you have to make those things. You have to expand your market as much as possible because you're already getting a small market share because there's fatigue.
That's a fair point to make. And I heard someone else say this before, where that's true, very true, but that's also how you kill a brand, because the next one that comes out is going to turn off all the people that bought it against their will, because they just are so committed to it. And then they buy it and they feel like it's not, it reaffirms all their concerns. So they're like, why would I buy the next one if this one let me down? Kind of like what happened with Star Wars.
Late stage capitalism is quarterly based. We have no ability to look out more than 1 or 2 years. So any choice that long-term fatigues people, microtransactions followed the same issue. People said they didn't like them, but then they engaged in them and it made a lot of money. And so they're going to keep doing them. And yes, there will come a day when we get frustrated and we quit games that have too heavy of microtransactions, but that's more than 4 quarters in the future. So there is no ability for a game that is publicly owned and traded. So it has a fiduciary duty to its investors to follow that. So the answer there would be to support your single and double A devs. The answer there would be to get away from these AAA games. When we're saying these AAA games are failing or whatever, AAA games are just intrinsically problematic. Spending this much money and this much time building something, I don't know how any of them are successful. Like, it's amazing.
The fact that they exist,
it's
I've
amazing.
always described as a miracle, because just the amount of effort that it would take to steer that ship, especially now. And we brought up many reasons. We haven't even talked about like interest rates going up, and that inflating the cost
anywhere, right? And you picked gaming,
right?
Like, especially like as an investor, you had so many financial mechanisms that could have performed at a static, decent rate, and you bet on gaming.
They're chasing after something, because one of the other things that, to kind of highlight another thing that's, I think, contributing to the success of GamerGate this year is games as a service games. While we've seen so many new ones come out and fail, I think the number is that 86% of all the revenue within gaming is coming from those style of games. So I think we're going to continue to see companies try and fail just so that they can try and get a slice of that ongoing pie. And that's the story of Sony in 2024 with Concord. It's like, that's them shooting for the moon, investing, not even, purchasing, the studio, but 400 million in the game itself, and then falling flat. And that's just, like, oh man, imagine what they could have done with that money if they decided to put it in any other bucket.
And this is where it really comes down to, is that there are games out there that have more of these defined traits, more DEI, that are having success. And so when that is happening, and then another game comes out that has less of these DEI things and then fails, and we're saying go woke, go broke, that seems weird to me. Like, if it was really that problematic, like if woke was something that we will, as a gaming population, the majority will rally against and will say, we are not supporting this, and that is why Concord failed, then why is Overwatch still around? Like, Overwatch is run by a company that not only does DEI, but has had issues with questionable ethics and things that universally people were upset at, and it's still making money.
Right.
So,
I would say that's a fair point. My counter to that is, yeah, it's not a perfect system. You're not going to have like that's woke, it's going to fail. I agree, but there is a strong correlation, maybe not a direct result, but I would say over the years, a strong correlation, especially recently, where the more woke a game is, typically the quality of the game is less. And I feel like that's also what comes into play, where DEI is involved, putting people in positions and senior positions at companies that didn't earn it, that shouldn't be there. They're not qualified. They're not talented enough. The art, the graphics aren't good enough. The gameplay mechanics aren't good enough. There's glitches, bugs. Like, a lot of DEI is not just, the pronouns. It goes a lot deeper than that. It's a multi-headed dragon, like I said, on this kind of stuff.
Right. And Ubisoft reported, or at least the information coming out from them in their case, because they were very much pushing this, but you get the story of this toxic positivity where it's like, people they've created a culture, for whatever the reasons, where you can't say, hey, this isn't fun. I'm not having a good time, because it could offend somebody and hurt their feelings. And so that, I think, especially when you're trying to create art, when it makes it feel like it's truly created by committee. And if you go against, the message, the narrative, you're going to get, and that's why I say I use religious terms. You're just going to get excommunicated from your career and or from, like, oh, your ability to, like whether it's make content or work for IGN or whoever, like whatever your dream was. And so you kind of, there's this also incentive to just put up and shut up and just kind of go along, go with the flow. And I think that's causing some of this as well.
That was a problem with Firewalk Studios too, where people were saying we don't want a pronoun on a robot, and they basically rebuted that, saying, "Well, tough luck. This is what we're doing." And I'm like, they're not really taking in the gamers' questions, concerns, because they're saying we know what's best, and we're going to force feed it to you. And it's like that's not a good communication with the same people you're trying to sell a game to.
You're
But
assuming
again,
that they're not getting feedback that appreciated it. So you're assuming that you are the only one voicing a concern, that there are not people that have a different view than you that are saying thankful for that. I'm not saying that is or isn't the case. I'm just saying there is a base assumption in your statement that they are not listening to gamers because they're not listening to me implies that there is no voice other than me.
I'm sure there's a voice other than me, but my base assumption is yes, there are far more gamers that would say, why are there pronouns on a robot than gamers saying there should be pronouns on a robot. I think
and that goes back to the avenue of feedback where we talked about with the media and with all of these things. It's like, what messages are they actually getting? Because hearing and listening, I think, are also two completely different traits. Like I hear you, or listening with that goal of actually like understanding it. And so that's the theory. I don't have data to back it up, but I would say that a lot of the avenues of feedback have been co-opted. And that's why you're seeing kind of YouTube and go in one direction, but the legacy media go in, the other direction. And who are the devs listening to? Who are the Dragon Quest devs listening to?
They're listening to loud minorities. They're listening to, when you're starting to see some of the data come out of some of these public reporting things going on in politics. And so you're starting to see kind of like how many people, are being reported for voter fraud and things like that. And what you're seeing is that it's a handful of people that are turning in the vast majority of reports. I believe that data absolutely correlates with what's happening in gaming. I think that the people who are submitting support to reports to devs, not something like this. I don't know if devs will ever see this podcast, but what I'm saying is like people who are submitting tickets and complaining are probably submitting more than one ticket and complaining, as opposed to I play most games and never submit feedback. If I quit and don't like it, I just quit. I quiet quit. I don't take time and write them a letter. So there's no chance to win back my business based on what I wanted to change because I didn't tell them.
Well,
I just quit.
This day and age, that is data because the games have hours played connected to the accounts. They can see that.
But how could they possibly know that I just got tired of my robot being referred to by a pronoun at 16 hours played and then quit? Like, how could they possibly know if people do or don't like that based on that? Unless somebody tells them, hey, I really appreciate you doing this. Hey, I really don't like that you're doing this. How could they possibly diagnose that?
This is how they do it. I can actually answer this question. So there's various different firms that extrapolate data that is found on social and what people are talking about. And so they don't have you specifically, Chris, with that. But then what they do is then they relate that to what else is being talked about. And I think that is actually one of the things I've seen happen where it discolors the amount of feedback. Why was there a Velma season 2? People hated the first one, but we're going to reward them with a high score because a lot of people are talking about it. You created controversy.
That's a fascinating way to interpret data that is wildly flawed.
Oh, it's absolutely flawed.
Because the things that I complain about in games are the things worth having a discussion about. And the things I brag about are the things worth having a discussion about. But the reasons I play or don't play might be much quieter. And so I find Call of Duty wildly infuriating. It makes me angry. It makes me use foul language. And yet I downloaded it and I play it. And so if you listen to me, you would assume that it's just this vitriol, that it's just this awfulness, that it's just making everybody angry. If you listen to what I say, if I were to share that on social media. But in reality, the reason I would stop playing is because like the lobby stopped being fun. But like, I'm not going to, that's not a fun post. Like, that's not fun to go out there and go, today I realized Call of Duty was less fun than something else in my backlog. Like that. So like, if that's really how they're collecting data, that's really flawed because they're only going to hear about the most politically divisive issues. And that may have nothing to do with why I play or don't play a game.
Right. It all gets analyzed. And honestly, I think we'll probably see AI kind of take in and start trying to,
Oh,
that's not going to
it's
do
not
better.
start. I think it's full swing right now. I think AI is doing scraping of message boards and giving feedback to these executives.
AI is so derivative. This version of AI is so derivative that I don't see how that's better.
Now, I want to highlight one super chat that we got here from Base Player. Says, wokeness in a good game is like a bug in your soup. A little bit can ruin your experience, and we don't like it. They know and they don't care, hence Gamergate. You guys have any comment on that?
I think that is true. It's overboiling it down, but I think that's true. If you're going to do a very high level view of it.
I think if it's a little bit, you can look beyond it. I think the reason it's bothering people is because it's a prominent amount. Well, I think letting people choose male versus female characters is not the end of the world. Letting people choose a pronoun or a skin color or any of that is fine. If it impacts the gameplay in some way, if there's a narrative component, how does it refer to me? Fine. Call of Duty didn't ask me that because there is no narrative component. There is no, I am not a character. I mean, I have an avatar, but like it's not representative of me in any way.
Do you worry about slippery slopes? Do you have lines that you ever draw, or do you just let it just kind of flow and go?
There definitely are things that if we allow this, we can expect it to get more. There's also just accommodation. I think both can be true.
Do you think that wokeness could be hidden in a combination, or do you think that
so like
separate?
There was, so when gay marriage was passed, there was an idea that if we allow people to marry people of the same gender, people will marry ducks. That was an actual accusation thrown out by a prominent politician.
Okay.
That is a false slippery slope. That has not been the case.
And
at no point
happening? There has been some articles.
And so at no point is there an idea that if I broaden the sense to include a group that's not me, and it didn't come in and change that I married my wife, it didn't change our marriage at all, it didn't make that more or less legal, it didn't obligate me to go back and consider more options, and so like I don't know that legality was a slippery slope. I don't know that kind of became a thing.
I would argue it kind of did, though. Like it opened the door up to people having conversations about, well, if they can do this, like maybe not a duck, but I've seen stories about other things or people trying to get married to, and it's like, well, why
Somebody
not?
married themselves.
Anita Sarkeesian.
Yeah, I believe so.
That was Anita Sarkeesian.
So I just don't see where, like, there are times that you can just let other people live their life, and it doesn't feel like it has to be this, oh no, what would come after that? I understand there's these fringe stories of somebody saying they married this, but like having the legal representation, that was what was argued for. There were already people living together. There were already people who said they loved each other and had ceremonies. That was already happening. What was not happening was the ability to go into a hospital and visit that person as a spouse and make those financial decisions and be on their health plan and all of these things that have to do with the legal definition of marriage, more so than what actually happens in my wife and I's relationship. What our vows meant to each other is more what our taxes mean to each other. So I think, like, there are times that inclusivity can just be inclusivity, and that's okay. It doesn't immediately mean that we have to an ADA ramp, having handicap ramps doesn't obligate me to take a wheelchair. I can still take the stairs. The stairs are still there. So there are times that inclusivity is just allowing more people to live their life. And then there are times where it says, hey, if we allow this, what else will we put up with?
Yeah, and I think it's starting to open up the conversation to a much broader conversation. We start going down this road, it gets away from gaming, which is exactly what the concern is with the gamergaters. Is it's like we just want our games. Stop trying to do this, because I understand your parallel to, well, I don't need to take the ramp, I can just use the stairs. It's there for people that need it. But the greater concerns are the quote unquote traditional destruction of traditional marriages, families, things like that, the erosion of the nuclear family, There are some legitimate concerns, I would say, surrounding that. And again, this is all getting away from gaming, but it does matter to gamers, because it's almost like people that don't agree with the traditional nuclear family in the traditional sense, and raising kids and things like that, are insidiously using video games as an avenue to let everyone know that that's fine to not have a nuclear family, to do what you want, just to be you, and just live your life, and which is fine, except for what happens if people are NPCs in this world and are told what they are doing is perfectly fine, and then they wake up one day 30 years in the future being like, what the hell did I do with my life? Why didn't I go down the path I wanted to go, instead of just listening to what these games were injecting into me? Like,
so your argument is that because people are arguing for more choice, that somebody might accidentally make too many choices? Because like you implied that people who are not the traditional definition are insidious. Insidious was your word.
Mhm.
And so then you're saying,
Yeah, that's my word.
that they're leading these people down this path. They're forcing them outside of a traditional, and then that they didn't
Not
get to
forcing,
make their choices.
not forcing, but almost like subconsciously. Like like that's the insidious part of it, where it's like you don't actively see it happening if you can't look past it. And I'm saying I see it. I take a broader view of what's happening. Whereas people are just picking up the game, the latest game on the shelf, and putting it in, or in this day and age, just downloading it and playing it, where they don't look past any of that, but it does insidiously creep into the mindset, and it does start making people think a different way. And that's fine. Like I said, you're welcome to think and do whatever you want. But I do have concerns for the destruction of the nuclear family, and how people might have some serious regrets down the road from that. That's
that's
gaming
why we
is not
don't.
supposed to defend for or against the nuclear family. We're going to keep it about gaming. Then it wouldn't do things either direction. And so I would say a slippery slope would be better for us to talk about microtransactions. That is something that by allowing those into games, we have only allowed to get bigger and bigger and bigger in games. And that then defending the nuclear family shouldn't be the issue either way.
But that's not, I think what we're arguing is two different things then. I feel like Gamergate is much bigger than microtransactions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but then when I started to bring up things outside of gaming, you said that's where people are afraid it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
But then you're arguing it should go that way. So I think I'm trying to understand, what are the bounds of what Gamergate's objectives are?
Gamergate's objectives are to keep games about games, stop injecting political ideologies into the games.
But we want to maintain the nuclear family.
I mean, that's one of the things, yes, but it's, again, that's outside of gaming. But gaming is used as an avenue to destruct that kind of thing. It's the same thing that happened in Hollywood. Same thing, they use all forms of entertainment to train people, to make you think
people
a certain way.
Are influenced. That's why you can't advertise to children, because they don't know they're being advertised to, and this can then gets extrapolated to why do people get paid out large sums of money to talk about a specific product. Is that influence has real power, and gaming has a huge influence and has had a huge influence on all of our lives.
It's almost like, that's a great point. It's almost like if you're trying to say it doesn't influence people, then why are there advertisements? Because if that's the case, how would an advertisement influence anyone? Why pay money? And if that's the case, why did they outlaw cigarette advertisements if they didn't influence people? So people are influenced by how things are presented to them. It's just how it works. And some people, like me, see it happening, and other people just consume and don't see it happening and might regret that.
Can it be neutral? You're against this direction. You're against this group of people that are presenting a set of ideas that you disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
Was it neutral before, or was it just a set of ideas you did agree with?
I would argue before it was more about making the game experience great. And that has shifted into a dynamic of being secondary to that. The game experience is still important, but it's not the main priority anymore. Now the ideology for certain developers and certain games is not the main priority, is not making the game great. It's, I want to push my agenda here and what I believe in. And that's the difference between what games used to be like and what they are now.
1985 to now, it's all been, how do we extract money out of this?
I don't think that. I genuinely don't. I don't think it's about the money for a lot of these developers anymore. I really don't. I feel like it's become it's about the money, but not from the consumer. Sorry, it's about the money from the investors. Whereas it used to be about how do we extract as much money out of consumers with this.
If it keeps happening, investors are going to get more spooked, and then the cost of making games is going to be less, or they're going to, like from a AAA perspective, they'll only be primarily, like very cookie cutter. That's one of the things that I think we've seen, just where it's just like, yeah, they took this content out, or they don't push the envelope as much because it's too big of a risk, and they've already spent $300 million. And now you're saying we need to spend, like, at some point, like that checkbook is saying, like, just publish it. Like, I can't keep putting, money into this. We have to get it out of the gate. Chris, I do want to talk about something even more controversial with Smash. But if you have a follow-up on that, we can go with that.
There are individual companies out there that value profit more. When you look out 10 years in the future, most of them, I don't think, make it, because money is what keeps a business around. If a business is not making money, it doesn't continue to exist.
Oh, I agree.
And we can look back at the past, and we can look at successful games, and we can look at those studios that are still around. But there is a giant graveyard from the 1980s to now of game studios that are not around.
And we'll see 5 years from now, and Sweet Baby Inc. will be gone, and all these other game companies will be
anybody that focuses on anything but how to make money. And how to make money is you have to sell games. And ultimately, you can have the best marketing, you can have the best message, you can have all these things. But if Ginger calls me up and says, "Hey, I heard you play this game. Was it any good?" and I say no, he won't buy it.
But the problem with the current environment, because I completely agree with you, is look at from the Netherlands and Dustborn being created. Was that Ragnar Tornquist, where they got government grants to create the game to support their studio, and he's buddy with the people in the film institute that give the money to him. His ultimate goal is pushing an ideology. It is not making a great game, and he's being supported by taxpayers that do not agree with it, but because there's backroom deals, it's allowing these games to come out, create, and support the companies. And that gets to another dynamic of, it's not about selling a game to consumers anymore. It's about extracting tax dollars from people to support a game company, because you have backroom deals and buddy with these people. And that could support them as long as those people are in power forever. And so in that case, it's not about how much money you can make. So what would you say to that?
How does it make more tax dollars?
There are some agreements with various different governments to fund the studio. We've seen that.
So I see how that spends dollars. So that creates, I guess they market that as that creates jobs with tax dollars.
Correct.
Investing
they
in
are
others.
only
We're going
supporting.
to help the following sector open up more manufacturing facilities or whatever.
But they are only supporting a specific studio that's pushing a specific ideology in their game, because they are buddy in the back room with them, and they know them, and they can hook them up with the money.
How is that sustainable?
Because they're in government power, they can just keep giving them money
until they get voted out. So like I had a congressman when I first moved into Dallas-Fort Worth, when I first bought a house here, the congressman I had was accused of funneling money to a company he invested in. And then he was taking his campaign dollars from companies that do not have any interest in my area. And so they weren't directly affecting his constituents in any positive way, but he was taking money from them, and he was making decisions based on the money he took, not the constituents he represented. He no longer has that seat. And so that is the solution to that.
But that was Smash's point, is that until they, that is,
but it's not forever. Like the electorate is the answer to that. The electorate is what in theory adds accountability to that.
I mean, you would think you have a lot more faith and accountability in government than I do right now. Yes, that is true. That is eventually will come to an end, but you're assuming that the right things will happen in the near term future to change that. And I'm arguing that I don't think that's necessarily the case, because this is just one facet of a multifaceted government that is giving money out to various organizations to improve the economy in the local sphere. So they can just blame it on that, and the people there don't care about the game.
If it's never a priority for the electorate, it'll never get addressed. There are, there's too many things. There's too many things to vote on. I voted this morning. I only got to choose person A, person B in each of these categories. In some of the categories, they ran uncontested. There was literally nobody to choose from. So like, if I don't like them, I can run myself, or I can suck it up. those
Right.
are my choices.
But my greater point being was you were saying studios will fail if they don't make games to make money, and I'm saying that's not necessarily true
That's
if they're
really
being
fringe.
subsidized by a government.
I think Sweet Baby Inc. will end up in the graveyard. I think.
I no, I do too. I do. I definitely agree with that. But I'm just saying that's that's only one. I mean, there's a lot of other areas to pick up the battle at where it's like, well, okay, so Sweet Baby Inc. I would argue potentially could be government subsidized as well. There's a lot going on with grants behind the scenes on the entire DEI push and initiatives, which is encouraging a lot of companies to go that direction. And it is not a natural customer push. It's more of a forced push due to ideology injections, but that's neither here nor there. I could
Now I do have like a hard out here in 30 minutes. So just as a heads up, this is the final subject. Speaking of kind of, I would say an issue that popped up this week was a viral video from clips that a podcast that you were on this week. And I made the case, especially in commenting on the clips, is that this actually sets the GamerGate 2.0 movement back. This isn't something that's benefiting it. And I was able to get and was invited on to talk with Hypnotic.
damn.
No. I was like, my dyslexia kicked in, and I was like, wait, I think of it in the same. For some reason, those words I mixed up. Hypnotic about it on his show. And so we had, I think, a really good heart to heart. I really enjoyed, the opportunity. His audience did not necessarily like what I had to say on it, but you were also a person on that clip. Now, for the context of it, when I always kind of think about it, because I've stated this numerous times, I'll live and die on this hill, is that in the context of comedy, I don't think there shouldn't be any golden calves. There shouldn't be any sacred thing. Like, you, in the context of comedy, should be able to say whatever you want that ideally is funny and gets a laugh. But that's really where I think the debate goes. And the one question that I didn't think of until the next day that I wish I would have asked Hypnotic is everything that you make comedy? And if everything you make is comedy, that is a help. But if you have stuff that you make that's comedic, and then stuff that you make that's not comedic, where's that line of demarcation? How does somebody who is watching know that they're watching comedy versus they're watching like a bit of information or news? You want to comment?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the best way to put it is like and this is something, it's funny you said you forgot to ask Hypno. He actually addressed this all on his own too, and I completely am in lockstep with him on it, but I'll basically give you my version of it. When you have a weekly YouTube podcast, or even show, or even this, like we're doing right now. Obviously the intent of it is to have a good conversation, but you have to remember you need to be entertaining. You will lose an audience if you're not entertaining. That's just that's the reality of how it works here. If you're boring, dry, you could find success being just boring, dry, and regurgitating information and giving your thoughts on it. But that's a dime a dozen. I think the standouts on the platform are those that are willing to take risks and say what they want to say, and have moments of comedy interjected and intertwined, and not always have a serious conversation. And when it comes to Saturday Night Hypnosis, I've been a regular on it for going on almost 3 months now, I think. Time does go by. And I've learned, and I used to watch them all the time even before I was a regular on it. And I'm very familiar with the format of the show and how it works. And Ryan is Ryan is like the lovable, just he'll say stuff all the time. This got clipped for 27 seconds, but he says this kind of stuff multiple times in every episode about every race, religion, nationality, gender. Nothing is off limits.
Right.
And that's one of the aspects that I genuinely love about SNH is you can just say shit and have people have a conversation about it and joke about stuff and not feel like you're on the rails of what's politically correct and what's not. You can just talk. I feel like all too often society has impacted the ability of people to be able to say things because they're afraid they're going to step on, crack some eggs when they walk, and they're walking on eggshells because they don't want to say the wrong thing or how it's going to be perceived. Ryan doesn't really have that filter. And it's why it's so funny to me that people are like losing their mind over this 27-second clip that got clipped completely out of context. When if you take a step back, we were having a larger conversation about Abu Bakr Salim and his game Tales of Kenzera Zhao, and how he was focusing the main point of his concerns and frustrations about racism. And that's where the conversation was going, was from him. And that's how it started going down this road of us talking about it, and Ryan trying to make light of stuff. And you ask, where do you draw the line between comedy and not? It's like,
no. Like I asked the question, what's the demarcation in terms of when I'm the viewer? How do I know I'm perceiving a comedic product? And that's, like, again, we're talking about like you said, a condensed clip of a bigger show. So playing the everyman here who is just hanging out, and all of a sudden that pops up into my feed. How do I know that this is a comedy product versus something like that? And there are, I think, some signs. It's not like there's a fast written rule, but that's what I'm getting at, is that in the context of comedy, like, hey, yeah, let's say you just saw a 5-second, clip that was saying horrible things about Italians. Like, is that a comedy thing that I just experienced, or what? Like, I would assume leave you wondering, like, what was this, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm getting at, is that when it comes down to it, if you make nothing but comedy, if everything that I produce was always comedic in its nature, then I would just point to, guys, like it says comedian in my bio. This is a comedy product. You don't have to like it, right? Like, some jokes will offend people, and that's part of being a part of, a comedian. But when it's when I'm bouncing back and forth between how I make content, I do have a comedy podcast, and so there is, again, there's a real clear, I think, line when you can see, I hope when I show up in a comedic sense versus when I'm just, talking with you guys about what's going on in gaming.
Well, I guess, but by doing that, you're saying there's a hard line. I'm just trying to understand.
No, it's not. It's just a way of communicating, right? Like, I kind of, when I get up on stage and do comedy, like, I put on.
That's a hard line of, you are delineating, I am a comedian in this area, so it's okay for me to go there with this dark humor in this instance. Would that be fair to say?
In the context of, just to add this into the goals of GamerGate, right? So if you guys represent what it means to achieve these goals that you stated at the beginning of this podcast, if you have that, do you not see what that viral clip sets back? I don't think
it doesn't set it back. I would argue.
You don't think so?
No, I think it proves our point.
Okay.
That we're our individuals. We don't conform to the expectations and the norms, where I feel like the other side always tries to control how you're allowed to speak, what you're allowed to say, what's acceptable terminology and what's not.
I'd agree with that. Yeah, go ahead.
And with SNH, it's like, no, we ain't doing that here. Like, that's not how we operate. So that situation just kind of goes away. I don't think the whole narrative of, oh, you guys set back the GamerGate movement, you set our side back. I'm like, no, we didn't. If you say that, then you're basically on the other side, because you want people to be able to control how people talk. That's a problem.
I don't want that at all.
I'm not saying you.
Yeah. I'm just clarifying, because I know, like, when I speak, I'm like, well, this is a real complicated, like, it's like, if we have to unpack it in terms of, like, a podcast that's several hours that you do, guys, this every weekend, you could define that as a product, but a clip on social media is a different kind of product. And that is out of our control, because anybody can make these clips. Anybody can take it out of context. And so the real question I'm getting at is that, is the goal GamerGate 2.0, or is it something else? Because if the goal is to make comedy, then yeah, make comedy. But like you, I would argue, and same thing with several of the people on that show, are key figures, are very visible figures in what it means to be, like, what is GamerGate 2? And when we talk about the masses, the people who are going to just walk into a GameStop, once a year and be like, what's the hot game? Like, what are they hearing? And if all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, like that's what I'm getting at, is that they're like, do we and how do we manage that relationship? Because you should be able to have that. Like, I don't want to ever come across like I'm in the way of people being crazy and whatnot. I think there's something really good about not trying to police language, but we're also in the context of, here is this movement that's happening, and somehow, I'm not the face of it, but like somebody who's the face of it is now on a clip that is going viral and has it.
You're explaining exactly how the other side operates, though, in doing that. They cut things out of context and try to push an agenda saying, look at how awful these people are. This is how we get our W's, is by basically, like we talked about earlier, only giving half the story, which is what they did with Sweet Baby Inc. This is what they do with everything. They only give half a story and push their agendas and try to make everyone sound like they're the most awful people in the world. Now, as far as my I've said this multiple times too. My stance, my take on what Ryan said is, I don't necessarily agree with it, nor did I find it particularly funny. But what will always trump that is his ability to say it. I will always push for that. Like, in the context, which is what's clipped from this clip, the context of the overall conversation. If you watch the entire 3 hours, you would see how we were talking about, again, Abu Bakr Salim bringing up race and why this is not helping his game sell. And it's like, well, why is he allowed to bring up race? And then he opens the door for that. We start talking about race. Ryan cracks a bad joke about it, but how are we now in the wrong? Because he's the one that opened the door for it. If he didn't go there, we wouldn't have either.
Right.
But
the group I want to kind of focus in on from just a thought experiment, because you defined the left perfectly. That is exactly the game they play. That's why I've argued that the reason why Gamergate, and I would say more the right, is winning is that we realize that none of us are perfect and we don't have to all adhere to that. Like, I can agree with you on this, but we're still in alignment on this bigger picture. What I'm talking about is the person who's right in the middle, who's not clipping these things out. This thing gets put into their feed. Like, do you think that has any negative impact towards?
Do you think that only one side is using the clip tool maliciously on any argument?
Me? No, I don't. I think we see it happen in, regardless of political affiliation and view. But I would say that I see it more, and this could also be a whole other subject that we don't have time for today, unfortunately, is how much of this is also algorithmically driven, right? Like, just because I don't see something doesn't mean that it's there, but the algorithm's going to give me the things that I either am going to engage with, be that positive or hyper negative. Anyway, Smash, go ahead.
There is a level of paradox with this, as far as how to where that person in the middle falls. And I would argue, I would want the person in the middle to be able to know that we stand for being allowed to say what you want to say and have your own individual thoughts. Where I look at the other side more falling in line, NPC, you need to act this way, say this thing, talk this way, and hold others accountable to be part of our groupthink. And let the person in the middle decide, are you going to be an NPC, or are you going to fall with the people that allow you to be you? Ironically, the same people that say allow you to be you, with the choice of, hey, we don't want this ideology of this groupthink being shoved down everyone's throat. We want to be able to enjoy our games the way they used to be enjoyed. And there's a lot of crossover between the two. But my perspective is, and objective is not to win over the middle guy. I feel like that's the kind of thing that happens naturally by just fighting for what you believe in.
I don't think political correctness is something that just flipped on and that we weren't policing our own speech before. I use different language to describe what's going on at work to my mother than I do to my wife. If somebody at work's being an ass, I may call him an ass, but I don't use that kind of language in front of my mother. Not because anybody told me to. I mean, she probably told me to when I was really small. And then I've just continued doing that. And so, like, it's not necessarily like a political correctness. It's just an audience. And so, like, depending on, so I don't know that all corrective speech is bad, and that I'm not being me in both of those contexts.
But you're trying to control what the audience of SNH is by saying that.
I don't think Chris is. He's just Giving
You're
him,
saying how you would approach things. I'm saying that's not how SNH approaches things, though.
But your implication is that you're for this free speech, and that anybody that is against that is like antithetical to your goal. And I'm saying like there are like, I'm not necessarily saying that people shouldn't have free speech. I'm just choosing these things, and I can like, free speech doesn't mean free from consequences. So if somebody walks into a public place and starts using lots of foul language and being really aggressive,
okay, you're making a lot of
leave,
right
as opposed to somebody else may do those things and they're like, well, I was just kidding, like I was just joking. And so like,
that's fair, but I mean,
I'm looking out beyond the show, because I didn't like,
right. No, I get it, but you're presenting an extreme where I'm like, here's the thing. It's like you're saying I wouldn't necessarily say those things, and that I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I wouldn't say those either, but I want to be on a place where we afford people the opportunity to say what's on their mind and try to be funny, which Ryan clearly is, and sometimes he hits, sometimes it's very funny.
That's the
and
review
I think that
of
was
my
the core,
comedy
and that's when we get
Sometimes
back to
it
the core.
hits.
The core question was, when is it comedy and when is it not? And comedy is the only art form that has to be good to be considered the thing that it is.
But that's,
I don't walk out of a movie and say that was a terrible movie. That wasn't even a movie. Like, I don't do that.
But comedy's in the eye of the beholder. How can you even say that? How can you say it has to be good? It has to be funny for it to be comedy. How can you say
because if you say something hateful, people will say, and you say, I was just kidding, people go, that wasn't a joke, that was hate speech. So like the line is clearly like it's defined by.
But if your approach is strictly comedic, even if it's not funny, you should be allowed to say he's not going directly.
So intent is what determines comedy.
I would say, yeah, I guess that I feel like you're looking way too far into this to find a gotcha moment where I'm like,
I'm not trying to get anybody. I'm asking.
No, it's fair. But what about like, let's take Dave Chappelle, for instance. Okay.
Sure.
If Dave Chappelle, everyone knows he's a comedian, but even if he's not on stage, but say TMZ catches him at the airport and he has
a strong influence on his local community, invests in local businesses. He has impacts that are not meant to be funny. Like, he's not funny in all contexts.
Right. But I'm saying, say TMZ catches him at the airport and he says a very racially charged comment that could be taken as a joke, but definitely could be taken as not a joke. How would you feel about it coming from him?
I would assume that he's been given permission by society to say whatever the hell he wants.
Society has to give permission now?
That's what happened.
He's
not going to be canceled. He's not going to be canceled for it. And yet he's not going to be canceled for it. He's not. And people can say he's canceled. He'll get another Netflix special. He'll make $10 million. So I'm just telling you the reality of the situation. That the president of Chick-fil-A could say the exact same thing and will be held to a different standard.
Okay. By you, though. You're saying society, and I'm asking you, how would you feel about it?
I'd need to see what he said.
Okay.
Yeah, in society, like I want to kind of
I do believe hate speech is a real thing, but I do believe that freedom of speech is a protected right and needs to be protected. So I believe we should be allowed to say pretty much everything up to the point of shouting fire in a crowded room and metaphorically equivalent things.
True. And I'll definitely agree with that. But say he said the same exact things Ryan Roger Athe said on SNH. If Dave Chappelle said that at an airport talking to TMZ, would you be like, it's Dave Chappelle?
I would be, it's Dave Chappelle. That'd be my first
my first default is
right. But Dave Chappelle is also a known entity, and viralness has that ability to go wide. But go ahead, Smash.
But my point being is that's why context matters. And people are trying to take a clip out of context and of saying this is who Ryan Roger Athe is, and people are trying to put him in a box that he is not. He is not. He is more like the Dave Chappelle.
Yeah,
I'm trying to let people know that, and sometimes sometimes he is genuinely very funny. Very rarely, but it happens. And other times he'll just say things completely off the wall, and people just like throw their head back, like Will did or me, where I'm just like, "What are you doing, man?" But it's like that. If you don't have that, then you lose a huge part of the entertainment of the show. Because that doesn't happen anywhere else. And people are trying to control where the show can go and what it can say. And that's where I stand up for him. Even if I don't agree what he said or how he said it, I'm still like, man, without Ryan, we wouldn't have this conversation. I think it's a fantastic conversation to have.
It's made stand-up a really hard medium because the way that a lot of
I don't think it has. I feel like people with that mentality have made stand-up a hard medium. I still love, I laugh my ass off at racy stuff at stand-up.
Well, and I can attest to like
stand-up comedy show and you start yelling at the comedian saying, hey, that's not funny. That's a you problem.
But I just think that I think this clip mentality has damaged stand-up comedy because a lot of early stand-up comics still have jobs. Mm-hmm. And so there can be very real consequences. And so when they are testing out material and they haven't quite honed it to where it tends to hit most of the room, they're going to have some duds. They're going to throw some things out there that don't land. And if those get clipped, there is now a clip of something that looks offensive and nobody laughed. And because nobody laughed, it's now in danger of that was just them trying to get away with saying something awful in the context.
Listen to how you're talking. It's in danger of, like, from who? Who gives a shit what these people are trying to do and cancel and say? In danger of.
Do you have a job with a morality clause? Those jobs exist. There are jobs out there that have morality clauses, and if a clip circulates, they lose their job. There can be real consequences for everyday people. I don't think Chappelle can be canceled.
Right. No, that's true. But I'm saying that's what I'm fighting against.
And I'm saying that it is in danger. I think we're agreeing. I'm just saying that because of the clip mentality, it has put the art of comedy at risk because free speech in that context is not as protected as it was before we could clip people.
Yeah. It's the clip mentality, the viral algorithm mentality. And the third pillar of that is, you brought up this earlier, is that, these people are clipping you guys. That's kind of their content. At least that's the pattern that I pick up, is that there's just, on the political spectrum, it's like they don't actually make content. They just go consume content and cut it out of context. And that's how they get relevance and attention, et cetera. It's like, guys, can you believe that,
in the social media world we live in, that's literally a way to get noticed, is by finding stuff, taking it out of context and having reshares of that. And unfortunately it's a successful medium that a lot of people choose to use. But long-term, it never works out for those people, but they don't care. They just want the instant gratification of it. But gaming kind of based, I just want to go back to real quick, because I know we're wrapping up here, but do you, based off what you're saying, do you, in the context of knowing what I'm talking about now, do you understand where I'm coming from and why it should be okay for Ryan to be how he is and what he said? Or do you feel like what he said was inappropriate and he should not ever say those things?
I don't know that it has to be one or the other. If I'm okay with it, then I can consume it. But if he has a sponsorship from Coca-Cola that broadcasts his show and that sponsorship gets pulled, that is their right as well. They're not saying he can't keep saying it. They're saying we expect him to. When people pull a sponsorship, they're not saying don't say it. It's already been said. They're saying I bet he keeps saying it. They're distancing it from future. It's already been said. They can't go back and change the past. They're saying we don't want to sponsor this in the future, and so those sponsorships getting pulled can be a form of financial censorship.
I think the Tim Dillon Magic Spoon ad read was perhaps one of the most amazing pieces of comedy, and that was the relationship that ended that day for them.
So as long as
they got so much publicity,
physical violence, I'm pretty much for, as long as it's not pouring over into violence, I'm pretty much for all free speech. That's just a blanket statement.
Yeah, no, that's what I stand for as well.
But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have consequences. It doesn't mean that if I walk into my boss's office and say something that I'm feeling in a moment of frustration, that there's not going to be consequences for the word choices.
That's understandable. But again, that's why I say context matters. Like with what we're talking about with Ryan right now, the context matters. Ryan wasn't going into his boss's office and saying some horrible things out of the blue and then leaving it. He was, he was participating in a conversation that was brought up by Abu Bakr Salim and adding, because he started it, opened the door. He was like, okay, this is what
I didn't see the whole show. So like I would want to see the whole show before I comment on one. So that's why I've left everything really general. So you seem frustrated that I've left everything general, but like, as you noted, a clip should not matter. I should have to watch the whole show.
And here's the problem that I have with it is that side reported the video and got it taken down so that nobody can now get the full context.
See, that I did not know that they got that video taken down, because that frustrates me, because my argument is still that from somebody who has a lot of time, usually when it comes to Twitter, I mean, who doesn't have a lot of time, it's like something comes in my feed, I check it out, I might comment on it, and I move on. I don't necessarily feel like I owe anybody like, oh, now I need to go in depth, figure out like, what was this thing that I just saw before I commented on. No one needs that's credentialing at its worst, where it's like, okay, well, you don't have a PhD, then therefore you can't comment. It's like, no, that's not how this works. Like,
Right.
you comment on everything. You can choose to ignore it, in that regards. But I think that's something that I did not know the video got taken down, and that removes that context. That means that the
Makes it much
clip,
harder.
well, it means that the clip ends up becoming the narrative. And that's the concern, and the reason why I said what I said. I was like, that's the concern, is that, people were saying like, are these your leaders and things like that? And it's like, well, what's the context? And that's the curiosity that I usually bring to it. But I also recognize that a lot of people don't owe us that. They don't owe, if a clip from the show goes, they don't owe us to go and watch the whole show, only if they feel like they should. And I don't want to put that expectation on others. But
Right.
this has been a great conversation, Smash. I'd like to, since you're our guest here, where can people find you? What you got going on?
Thank you. This was a great conversation. I appreciate the difference of opinions, but be able to agree and respectfully disagree and still move on with it. This is awesome. You can find me at smashjt.com, youtube.com/smashjt, Twitter @smashjt. But yeah, it's been a wild ride as of recently. And I really appreciate conversations like this, because it gets at what this is all about. I feel like often it's superfluous shit that doesn't matter. It's like, when we start talking about this actually rubber hits the road. What are we doing here?
They
And
increased that DPS by 2%. They're monsters. Like, wow. All right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, but it was great. Thank you again for having me. I appreciate it.
Really appreciate it. Hopefully your headache is cleared up, or that you have a smooth
I just
sailing
needed my
day.
coffee. I'm good. I got my
Yeah,
coffee.
there we
That's where
go.
I'm coming from.
Chris, where can people find you, sir?
Here every week. Looking back to getting back to more content creation over the next year. But since my step away from full time, this has been it. So it's been something I look forward to every Friday. Some weeks are more gaming focused than others. But it's been good.
And then I am here. This is the main channel that I run. We've been having a lot of fun over on the MMO channel as well. So thanks everybody for the support. If you guys enjoyed the podcast, you're watching this as a VOD or MP3, however you can consume it, leave a review, leave a comment. Would love to hear from you guys. And I really do appreciate Smash and Chris for being able to step in. And I was like, this is going to obviously be a big topic, but it is the topic. I don't think that the answer is to not talk about it. I think the answer is to actually talk about these things more and find those common grounds and find where we agree, where we disagree, and then ultimately, hopefully make gaming better for everybody. But in this regards, thank you everybody for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the show, and hopefully we'll see you next time. But until then, take care.